I've witnessed plenty of life and death moments during my 5 years working with emergency response teams, but I never thought the most painful moment of my life would happen right on the ancestral land my family had lived on for 5 generations. My grandfather, the keeper of our 150-year-old home, was gasping for breath from a heart attack, while the ambulance was blocked right at the entrance by a white SUV and a woman who called herself the guardian of neighborhood order. The HOA president told the rescue team they weren't allowed to drive through the common road because it would break aesthetic standards, but she didn't know there were rules bigger than the HOA, and when I activated them, it wasn't just the barriers that got removed. Where are you watching from? Comment below, because this is the story of how someone who was looked down upon erased the entire empire she thought would last forever. The story begins on what should have been a peaceful Tuesday morning in October. I was visiting Grandpa Henry at our family's Victorian home in Willowbrook Estates, a gated community that had sprouted around our property like mushrooms after rain. Our house, built in 1874, stood like a dignified old gentleman among the cookie-cutter McMansions that had invaded our neighborhood over the past decade. Grandpa Henry, at 76, was still sharp as a tack and insisted on maintaining every inch of the property himself, from the hand-carved oak railings to the original slate roof that had weathered more storms than most people see in a lifetime. I had taken a break from my cybersecurity consulting work to help him install some modern smart home devices. "Danny," he'd said with that mischievous twinkle in his eye, "if we're going to be surrounded by these tech-obsessed neighbors, we might as well speak their language." So there I was, setting up Ring doorbells, smart smoke detectors, and a comprehensive home automation system that would make even the most gadget-obsessed millennial jealous. Little did I know these devices would soon become the key to unraveling a web of lies that stretched back 15 years. The morning had started perfectly normal. Grandpa Henry was telling me stories about the neighborhood's transformation while I calibrated the new security cameras. "You know, Danny, when your grandmother and I first moved here, this whole area was just farmland and forest. Now look at it. All these identical houses with their perfectly manicured lawns and ridiculous HOA rules." He chuckled, but there was something in his voice that seemed different today, more urgent somehow. "There's something I need to tell you about Eleanor Blackwood, that HOA president. Something important about her past that you should know." But before he could continue, his face suddenly went pale, and he clutched his chest with both hands. The heart attack hit him like a freight train. One moment he was gesturing toward the window, pointing at Eleanor's pristine white SUV parked across the street, and the next he was collapsing onto the antique Persian rug that had been in our family for generations. I immediately called 911 while performing CPR, my hands shaking as I tried to remember everything from my emergency response training. The dispatcher assured me that an ambulance would arrive within 8 minutes, and I could hear the sirens approaching within what felt like seconds. Everything was going according to plan until Eleanor Blackwood decided to play traffic cop. As the ambulance turned onto our street, Eleanor's white Escalade suddenly lurched forward, blocking the narrow entrance to our private driveway. She emerged from her vehicle like some sort of suburban warrior, wearing designer sunglasses indoors and carrying what appeared to be a noise meter and a measuring tape. "Excuse me," she announced to the paramedics in a voice that could freeze hell, "but this vehicle exceeds the 2.5-meter height restriction for residential areas, and I'm reading noise levels of 78 decibels, which is 33 decibels above our community standards." The paramedics stared at her in disbelief, explaining that they had a cardiac emergency and needed immediate access. Eleanor's response was as cold as her perfectly Botoxed expression. "Rules are rules. No exceptions. You'll need to find an alternative route." The alternative route meant driving around the entire gated community, adding 15 precious minutes to what should have been a 2-minute trip. I pleaded with Eleanor, explaining that my grandfather was dying, but she stood there with her arms crossed, occasionally glancing at her smartphone and checking her manicure, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in her perfectly scheduled day. "Young man," she said, adjusting her sunglasses with theatrical precision, "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Neighborhood Excellence, and I will not compromise the aesthetic integrity of our community for anyone." Behind those designer shades, I caught a glimpse of something that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just indifference in her eyes, it was something calculating, almost predatory. As the ambulance was forced to take the long way around, I stayed with Grandpa Henry, watching his condition deteriorate with each passing minute. His breathing became more labored, and his grip on my hand grew weaker. In those final moments, as we waited for help that should have arrived 10 minutes earlier, He managed to whisper something that would haunt me for weeks to come. Sarah, Eleanor, the smart house. Everything's recorded, Danny. Check the cloud storage. Password is Sarah 1995. His eyes met mine one last time, and I could see he was trying to tell me something crucial. Something about Eleanor that went far beyond HOA power trips and noise complaints. The paramedics finally arrived, but it was too late. Grandpa Henry passed away in the ambulance, 15 minutes after what should have been a routine emergency response. As I watched them load his body into the vehicle, Eleanor approached me with what she probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Daniel. But you have to understand that rules exist for a reason. We can't just let emergency vehicles tear up our beautiful brick pathways whenever they please." She handed me an invoice for $500, itemized as emergency road cleaning and aesthetic restoration fee. I stared at the paper in disbelief, unable to process the audacity of someone charging a grieving grandson for the privilege of watching his grandfather die. But Eleanor Blackwood had no idea what she had just set in motion. She didn't know that our 150-year-old house was equipped with the most advanced smart home technology money could buy. She didn't know that every word, every glance, every calculated moment of her obstruction had been recorded in crystal clear 4K video and stored securely in the cloud. Most importantly, she didn't know that my grandfather's final words had just given me the key to a mystery that would bring her entire world crashing down. As I stood there, holding that ridiculous invoice, watching her drive away in her pristine white SUV, I made a promise to Grandpa Henry's memory. Eleanor Blackwood thought she held all the power in this neighborhood, but she was about to learn that some games have rules she never knew existed. The funeral was held 3 days later under a gray October sky that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. As I watched them lower Grandpa Henry's casket into the ground, I couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's cold, calculating stare from that morning. She dared to show up at the service, wearing an appropriately black designer dress and offering her deepest condolences to everyone who would listen. "Henry was such a pillar of our community," she told the other mourners with practiced grief. "Though I do hope the family will consider updating that old house to match our neighborhood's aesthetic standards." Even at a funeral, this woman couldn't help but assert her dominance over property values and HOA regulations. After the service, I returned to the empty house that now felt impossibly large without Grandpa Henry's presence. The smart home devices I had installed just days earlier seemed to hum with an eerie awareness, as if they too were mourning their primary user. That's when I remembered his final words about cloud storage and the password Sarah 1995. I opened my laptop and accessed the home automation system's data logs, not quite sure what I was looking for, but trusting that Grandpa Henry had left me breadcrumbs for a reason. What I found in those digital archives would change everything I thought I knew about our seemingly peaceful neighborhood and the woman who ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet HOA glove. The smart home system had been recording everything for the past week, and I mean everything. Every conversation, every visitor, every phone call that happened within range of the various microphones and cameras scattered throughout the house. As I scrolled through the logs, I discovered that Grandpa Henry had been using voice commands to research Sarah Blackwood case 2010 repeatedly over the past month. The Alexa logs showed dozens of searches about unsolved deaths, suspicious accidents, and inheritance law. Google Home had recorded him saying things like, "Play news about Sarah Blackwood's death," and "Search for Eleanor Blackwood financial records." It was clear that my grandfather had been conducting some kind of investigation, and Eleanor's name kept appearing in every search query like a recurring nightmare. The most chilling discovery came from the Ring doorbell footage from the week before his death. The high-definition cameras had captured Eleanor driving slowly past our house at least 6 times, sometimes stopping to take photos of the property with her smartphone. In one particularly disturbing clip from 2 nights before the heart attack, she could be seen standing at the edge of our driveway at 2 a.m., staring up at Grandpa Henry's bedroom window with that same predatory expression I had glimpsed during the ambulance incident. The timestamp showed she had stood there for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally speaking into her phone in hushed tones that the sensitive microphones managed to pick up. "He's getting too close to the truth. We need to accelerate our timeline." Eleanor's behavioral pattern became even more suspicious when I analyzed the GPS data from her vehicle's built-in tracking system, which the smart home network had automatically logged whenever she entered our driveway's proximity sensors. The data revealed that she had been conducting surveillance on our property for weeks, always during odd hours when she thought no one would notice. More disturbing was the discovery that she had somehow gained access to our Wi-Fi network and had been monitoring our internet searches and email communications. This level of digital stalking went far beyond the typical HOA president's nosiness and ventured into criminal territory that made my cybersecurity expertise suddenly feel very personal and very necessary. But the most damning evidence came from a voice recording captured by the kitchen's smart speaker just hours before Grandpa Henry's heart attack. The audio quality was crystal clear, and Eleanor's voice was unmistakable as she spoke to someone on the phone. "The old man knows about Sarah. He's been asking questions, digging into records that should have stayed buried. If he talks to his grandson, everything we've built here will come crashing down. We can't let that happen, not after all these years of keeping this secret safe." The conversation continued with Eleanor discussing contingency plans and making it look natural, words that sent chills down my spine as I realized what I might be listening to. Eleanor's persistence in asking about electronic devices in the house suddenly made perfect sense. During the past week, she had knocked on our door 3 separate times, each visit recorded by multiple cameras and microphones. She had asked about upgrading the neighborhood security systems, inquired about our internet connectivity, and even offered to help coordinate a technology audit for insurance purposes. What she was doing was trying to determine how much digital evidence might exist of her activities and conversations. The woman who presented herself as a tech-phobic HOA dictator was quite sophisticated in her understanding of modern surveillance capabilities. The final piece of the puzzle came from Grandpa Henry's voice, recorded during what must have been one of his last conscious moments before the heart attack. "Danny," his voice echoed from the smart speaker with painful clarity, "if something happens to me, remember that Eleanor killed her sister Sarah 15 years ago to inherit the family fortune. I have proof, and she knows I have proof. The cloud storage contains everything she tried to hide, everything she thought was buried with Sarah. She's not just a power-hungry HOA president. She's a murderer who's been living under our noses all this time." As I sat in the darkness of our ancestral home, surrounded by the gentle hum of technology that had captured a killer's confession, I realized that Eleanor Blackwood had made a fatal error. She had underestimated both the power of modern smart home technology and the determination of a grandson who had just lost the most important person in his life. But what Eleanor didn't know was that her digital footprints had left a trail of evidence that would lead straight back to a 15-year-old murder, and I was about to follow that trail wherever it led, no matter how dangerous the journey might become. Armed with Grandpa Henry's final revelation, I dove deeper into the cloud storage system, treating it like the most important cybersecurity investigation of my career. The data architecture he had set up was surprisingly sophisticated for a 76-year-old man, with encrypted folders, backup systems, and multiple redundancies that would make any IT professional proud. As I navigated through terabytes of surveillance data, I began to understand that my grandfather hadn't just been a retired police detective living quietly in an old house. He had been conducting a methodical, long-term investigation into Sarah Blackwood's death, and the digital evidence he had accumulated was damning. The first breakthrough came from metadata analysis of Eleanor's digital communications. The smart home system had been passively collecting data from any device that connected to our Wi-Fi network, and Eleanor's phone had been automatically backing up photos, messages, and location data every time she visited our property. What I found in those backups painted a picture of a woman who was far more tech-savvy and calculating than her public persona suggested. Text messages from 2010 showed detailed conversations about handling the Sarah problem and making sure the inheritance goes smoothly. Even more disturbing were the photos she had taken of Sarah's apartment building, fire escape routes, and security camera blind spots in the weeks leading up to her sister's death. The digital forensics revealed that Eleanor had been using sophisticated methods to cover her tracks for over a decade. She had systematically deleted Sarah's social media accounts, email addresses, and digital presence immediately after the funeral, claiming to be protecting the family's privacy during our time of grief. But the cloud storage had captured screenshots and backups of everything before the deletion spree began. Sarah's final Instagram posts showed a young woman who was genuinely excited about inheriting the family business and had big plans for charitable giving. Her last Facebook message, sent just hours before her death, read, "Finally told Eleanor about the new will today. She didn't take it well, but it's time to do something meaningful with Grandpa's money instead of just hoarding it." Eleanor's response to that message was captured in a series of increasingly frantic text exchanges with an unknown contact identified only as JP in her phone. "She's going to ruin everything we've worked for," Eleanor had written. 20 years of planning, and she wants to give it all away to strangers. We can't let this happen. The response from JP was equally chilling. I can make the problem disappear, but it has to look completely natural. No questions, no investigations, no loose ends. The timestamp on these messages was less than 6 hours before Sarah's reported accidental fall down the stairs of her apartment building, but the most damning evidence came from Eleanor's security cameras, which she had forgotten were automatically uploading to a cloud service. The footage from the night of Sarah's death showed Eleanor entering her sister's apartment building at 11:47 p.m., using what appeared to be a copied keycard. She emerged exactly 23 minutes later, looking composed and checking her phone. The building's elevator logs, which I was able to access through a cybersecurity contact, showed that Eleanor had used the elevator to reach Sarah's floor and then taken the stairs down, presumably to avoid being captured on the stairwell cameras that would have recorded her sister's fall. Eleanor's paranoia about digital evidence suddenly made perfect sense when I discovered she had been systematically hacking into the smart devices of multiple neighbors over the past 5 years. Using a combination of social engineering and readily available hacking tools, she had gained access to Ring doorbells, smart TVs, and home security systems throughout Willowbrook Estates. This wasn't just about maintaining HOA control. It was about monitoring potential threats to her secret and ensuring that no one was getting too close to the truth about Sarah's death. The woman who publicly complained about young people and their gadgets was secretly one of the most digitally invasive neighbors anyone could imagine. The investigation took a darker turn when I found evidence that Eleanor had used artificial intelligence and deepfake technology to create fabricated evidence of Sarah's supposed depression and suicidal thoughts. She had generated fake journal entries, manipulated photos to suggest isolation and mental illness, and even created a convincing final video where Sarah appeared to admit feeling hopeless about her future. The sophistication of these fabrications was genuinely impressive and terrifying, showing that Eleanor had been planning her sister's murder for months, while simultaneously creating a digital narrative that would explain away any suspicious circumstances. My analysis was interrupted by a knock at the door that made every smart home sensor in the house light up with alerts. Through the Ring doorbell's live feed, I could see Eleanor standing on my porch with what appeared to be an iPad and a concerned expression that looked about as genuine as a $3 bill. "Daniel, honey," she called out in a voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I've been so worried about you rattling around in this big old house all by yourself. I thought maybe we could discuss some grief counseling resources and perhaps talk about modernizing some of these old electrical systems for safety purposes." The irony of a murderer offering grief counseling wasn't lost on me, but what caught my attention was her obvious desperation to get inside and assess how much I might have discovered. I opened the door with a smile that matched her fake concern perfectly. "That's so thoughtful of you, Eleanor. I've been doing some research myself, learning about digital estate planning and family history preservation. Amazing what you can find in old computer files and cloud storage these days." Her face went through a microscopic but unmistakable series of expressions: confusion, calculation, and finally barely controlled panic. "Oh, computers can be so unreliable," she said with a nervous laugh. "Old files get corrupted, you know. Sometimes it's better to just start fresh and not dwell on the past." But Eleanor Blackwood had no idea that dwelling on the past was exactly what I planned to do, and her 15-year-old secret was about to become front-page news in the most technologically documented murder case our quiet neighborhood had ever seen. With damning digital evidence in hand, I decided it was time to take my cybersecurity skills into full combat mode against Eleanor's carefully constructed web of lies. My first move was to create a comprehensive digital forensics report that would be admissible in court, complete with timestamps, metadata analysis, and chain of custody documentation that even the most skeptical prosecutor couldn't ignore. But as I began reaching out to law enforcement contacts and preparing to file formal complaints, Eleanor launched her technological counteroffensive that proved she was far more dangerous and sophisticated than I had initially realized. The first sign that Eleanor was escalating came through my home security system's intrusion detection alerts. Someone with advanced hacking skills was attempting to breach our network firewall, using techniques that went far beyond basic script kiddie attacks. The intrusion attempts were coordinated, persistent, and showed intimate knowledge of the smart home devices I had installed. When I traced the attack vectors back to their source, I discovered they were originating from multiple IP addresses registered to shell companies that all led back to one person, Judge Patterson, Eleanor's mysterious contact JP from the text messages. This wasn't just a HOA power trip anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy involving a sitting judge who had been helping Eleanor cover up murder for 15 years. Judge Patterson turned out to be the Honorable James Patterson, a 62-year-old family court judge with an impeccable public reputation and some very dark private secrets. The digital evidence revealed that he and Eleanor had been lovers since 2009, conducting their affair through encrypted messaging apps and meeting at properties he owned under various LLC names. More disturbing was the discovery that Patterson had been the judge who originally ruled Sarah's death an accident, despite evidence that should have warranted a full investigation. The man who was supposed to represent justice had instead become an accessory to murder, using his position to bury evidence and silence potential witnesses. Eleanor's technological sophistication became truly frightening when I discovered she had been using artificial intelligence to create deepfake videos and audio recordings designed to discredit anyone who might threaten her. Secret. She had generated fake security footage showing Sarah in various states of emotional distress, complete with timestamps that aligned with her fabricated narrative of suicide. Even more chilling was a deepfake video of Sarah supposedly confessing to embezzling money from the family business, a crime that would have justified disinheriting her even if she hadn't died. The level of premeditation and technological savvy required for this kind of evidence manipulation suggested that Eleanor had been planning her sister's murder for years, not months. But Eleanor's biggest mistake was underestimating my ability to turn her weapons against her. Using honeypot techniques I had learned during my FBI consulting days, I created fake vulnerabilities in our smart home system that would tempt any would-be hacker into revealing their methods and location. Sure enough, Eleanor took the bait, attempting to plant malware that would have given her remote access to all our devices and data. Instead, her malware installation triggered a hidden subroutine that began collecting evidence of her hacking attempts, while simultaneously feeding her false information about my investigation's progress. The psychological pressure began taking its toll on Judge Patterson faster than on Eleanor. His attempts to hack our system became increasingly desperate and sloppy, leaving digital fingerprints that a first-year cybersecurity student could have traced. When I finally decided to confront him directly, I found a man who was cracking under the weight of 15 years of guilt and fear. She has photos, he confessed during a recorded phone call that I had legally obtained through proper law enforcement channels. Pictures of me with other people who weren't my wife. She said if I didn't help her with Sarah, she'd destroy my career, my marriage, my reputation. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought she'd kill her sister. Eleanor's reaction to Patterson's growing instability was swift and ruthless. When she realized he was becoming a liability, she began preparing to eliminate him just as she had eliminated Sarah. The smart home system captured her researching his medical conditions, his daily routines, and his prescription medications. She had even gone so far as to create deepfake evidence, suggesting that Patterson had been embezzling court funds, presumably to provide a motive for his anticipated suicide. The woman who had killed her sister for money was now planning to murder her lover and co-conspirator to protect her secret. But Eleanor's technological arrogance led to her most critical error. She had become so confident in her ability to manipulate digital evidence that she started leaving increasingly obvious traces of her activities. Her Google search history, automatically backed up to the cloud despite her attempts to delete it, revealed searches for how to fake judge suicide, untraceable poisons for heart patients, and making car accidents look natural. Even more damning were her online purchases of surveillance equipment, hacking software, and chemistry supplies that could only be used for one purpose: eliminating anyone who threatened to expose her crimes. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source: Eleanor's smart home system. In her paranoia about being monitored, she had installed comprehensive surveillance in her own house, never realizing that the same cloud storage vulnerabilities she exploited in other people's homes applied to her own devices. Her security cameras had captured her practicing fake grief expressions in front of a mirror, rehearsing the concerned neighbor act she had performed at Grandpa Henry's funeral. More importantly, they had recorded her conversations with Patterson about cleaning up loose ends and ensuring that the old detective's grandson doesn't become a problem like his grandfather did. As I compiled this mountain of digital evidence into a comprehensive case file, I realized that Eleanor Blackwood had created the perfect digital paper trail of her crimes. Her technological sophistication, which she thought made her untouchable, had made her more vulnerable than any criminal in history. Every device she had used, every network she had accessed, every digital tool she had employed in service of murder and cover-up had left traces that led directly back to her. The woman who had killed to protect her secrets was about to discover that in the digital age, there are no secrets that technology cannot eventually reveal. Eleanor's desperation reached a new level when she realized that her digital fortress was crumbling around her. Instead of retreating or attempting to negotiate, she doubled down with a plan so audacious and technologically sophisticated that it almost worked. Her strategy was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. If she couldn't destroy the evidence or silence me through intimidation, she would eliminate me using the very smart home technology that had exposed her crimes. What Eleanor didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact scenario and had been preparing the ultimate digital ambush for weeks. The first indication that Eleanor was planning something drastic came through my network monitoring systems, which detected unauthorized access attempts targeting our home's critical infrastructure. Someone with administrator-level privileges was trying to gain control of our gas lines, electrical systems, and HVAC controls. The attack signature was sophisticated enough to bypass most consumer-grade security systems, but my military-grade cybersecurity setup flagged every intrusion attempt and began logging the attacker's methods and digital fingerprints. What I discovered was that Eleanor had somehow obtained legitimate service credentials from the utility companies, probably through social engineering or bribery, giving her unprecedented access to potentially lethal building systems. Eleanor's plan became crystal clear when I analyzed the sequence of her hacking attempts. She was systematically testing vulnerabilities in our smart thermostat, gas leak detectors, and electrical panel controls, looking for ways to create what would appear to be a tragic but completely accidental death. The gas leak scenario seemed to be her preferred method. She could remotely disable our gas sensors, open the main line valve, and then trigger an electrical spark that would incinerate both me and any evidence I might have hidden in the house. The beauty of this plan, from a criminal's perspective, was that it would look like a grieving grandson who had accidentally caused a gas explosion while trying to repair his late grandfather's old appliances. But Eleanor had made a critical miscalculation. She assumed I was just another tech-savvy millennial who relied on consumer-grade smart home devices without understanding their underlying security vulnerabilities. What she didn't realize was that I had replaced every single device in the house with military-grade equipment that not only detected her intrusion attempts but actively worked to trace them back to their source. Every time she tried to access our systems, she was connecting to a sophisticated honeypot that collected her digital fingerprints, recorded her methods, and fed false information about her progress back to her command center. The psychological warfare escalated when Judge Patterson finally cracked under the pressure and called me directly, his voice shaking with fear and barely controlled panic. "Daniel, you have to listen to me," he whispered into the phone, clearly afraid of being overheard. "Eleanor isn't just planning to discredit you or steal your evidence. She's going to kill you the same way she killed your grandfather." The heart attack wasn't natural. She's been practicing with smart home hacks for months, and she can make anything look like an accident. His confession was being automatically recorded by my call monitoring system, but more importantly, it confirmed my worst suspicions about Grandpa Henry's death. Eleanor hadn't just blocked the ambulance. She had actively caused the heart attack by hacking his pacemaker through the smart home network. Patterson's revelation about the pacemaker hack sent chills down my spine as I realized the true extent of Eleanor's technological capabilities. She had been using Internet of Things vulnerabilities to commit perfect murders for years, targeting people whose deaths would look completely natural to any medical examiner. The smart home devices that were supposed to make our lives safer and more convenient had become weapons in the hands of a psychopath who understood their weaknesses better than their manufacturers did. My grandfather's pacemaker, which had been connected to our home network for remote monitoring by his cardiologist, had become the murder weapon that killed him as surely as any gun or knife. Eleanor's response to Patterson's betrayal was swift and merciless. Within hours of his phone call to me, she launched a coordinated cyber attack against both of our homes simultaneously. While trying to trigger a gas explosion at my house, she was also attempting to hack Patterson's home security system to make it appear that he had committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. The attack was incredibly sophisticated, involving multiple attack vectors, false flag operations designed to implicate other hackers, and even deepfake evidence that would be discovered after our deaths to support whatever narrative she wanted to establish. She was essentially trying to commit a double murder using nothing but computer code and remote access to smart home devices. But Eleanor's technological hubris became her downfall. In her confidence that she could control every aspect of the digital crime scene, she had forgotten that the best cybersecurity defense is often the simplest one: complete isolation from network access. I had been running our critical home systems on a closed network that was physically separated from the internet, while feeding Eleanor false information through decoy devices that appeared to be our real smart home controls. Every command she sent to disable our gas sensors or trigger an electrical fault was being logged as evidence, while not affecting our actual safety systems. The trap reached its climax when Eleanor decided to physically enter our property to verify that her cyber attack had been successful. The smart home sensors detected her presence the moment she set foot on our driveway, and the high-definition cameras began recording her every move in infrared clarity. She was carrying what appeared to be a tablet computer and some kind of electronic device that my sensors identified as a signal jammer, presumably to prevent me from calling for help after she manually triggered whatever backup plan she had prepared. What she didn't know was that every step she took was being broadcast live to a secure server located 3 states away, creating an unalterable record of her presence at what she expected to be a crime scene. Eleanor's shock was visible even through the infrared cameras when she realized that the house was not only intact but actively monitoring her every move. The screens she expected to show a gas-filled, spark-ready death trap instead displayed security camera feeds and system status reports that proved her cyber attack had failed. Her tablet showed successful connections to our decoy systems, but the real infrastructure remained completely untouched and fully operational. As she stood in our driveway, frantically checking her devices and trying to understand how her perfect technological murder had gone wrong, she was providing the final piece of evidence needed to prove premeditated attempted murder. The beauty of the trap was that Eleanor had incriminated herself using her preferred methods. Every hack attempt, every unauthorized access, every malicious command she had sent was logged with timestamps, digital signatures, and forensic quality evidence that no court would ever dismiss. She had essentially written her confession in computer code, creating a digital paper trail that documented not only her current murder attempt but also provided the missing pieces needed to prove she had killed Grandpa Henry, Sarah, and probably several other victims whose deaths had been written off as natural causes or accidents. Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who thought technology made her untouchable, had just been caught in the most comprehensively documented attempted murder in legal history. The confrontation I had been building toward for weeks finally arrived on a cold November evening when Eleanor made her most desperate and revealing mistake. I had spent days preparing the perfect digital ambush, turning our entire house into a comprehensive evidence-gathering operation that would capture not just her actions, but her words, her motivations, and most importantly, her confessions. The plan was elegantly simple: create a scenario so convincing that Eleanor would believe she had finally succeeded in silencing me while providing law enforcement with the most detailed record of premeditated murder ever captured on film. My preparation began with a carefully orchestrated deception campaign across social media and local news outlets. Using my contacts in cybersecurity and journalism, I planted stories suggesting that I had been overwhelmed by grief and was taking an extended leave of absence to recover from the trauma of losing my grandfather. The fake news articles described me as distraught and unable to cope, with sources claiming I had been acting erratically and talking about joining my grandfather. To make the deception complete, I arranged for my car to be seen leaving town while I remained hidden in the house, monitoring every aspect of Eleanor's response to what she believed was my emotional breakdown and departure. Eleanor's reaction to the fake news was immediate and revealing. Within hours of the articles appearing online, she was conducting surveillance on our property, her excitement barely contained as she realized that her greatest threat was neutralizing himself through psychological collapse. The smart home cameras captured her making phone calls, where she could be heard saying things like, "The problem is solving itself, and sometimes the best plan is no plan at all." Her overconfidence was exactly what I had been counting on, because it would make her careless enough to reveal information she had kept hidden for 15 years. The centerpiece of my trap was a state-of-the-art recording system that turned every room in the house into a professional quality evidence collection site. Hidden cameras with 4K resolution and directional microphones captured every angle, while AI-powered voice analysis software ensured that every word would be clearly audible and legally admissible. The feeds were being broadcast in real time to a secure server farm located in another state, creating an unalterable record that couldn't be destroyed even if Eleanor managed to burn down the entire house. More importantly, the system was configured to automatically alert law enforcement the moment it detected certain trigger words or phrases related to murder, assault, or threats of violence. Eleanor arrived at the house just after midnight, clearly believing that she was walking into an empty building where she could destroy evidence and stage whatever final scene would best support her narrative. She was carrying a military-grade signal jammer, a laptop computer, and what appeared to be accelerant for starting a fire. The infrared cameras tracked her every movement as she methodically disabled what she thought were our security systems, never realizing that she was disabling decoy devices, while the real surveillance network continued recording her every action. Her confident, predatory movements, as she stalked through our family home, were captured in horrifying detail, showing a woman who took pleasure in the power she wielded over life and death. The psychological revelation came when Eleanor began talking to herself, apparently believing she was completely alone and unobserved. 15 years of keeping this secret, she muttered while setting up her laptop in Grandpa Henry's study, and it all comes down to one nosy old man and his idealistic grandson. Well, Henry's already taken care of. And now Daniel's going to have a tragic accident just like dear sister Sarah. Her casual tone while discussing multiple murders was chilling, but it provided exactly the kind of unguarded confession that prosecutors dream about. She was essentially narrating her crimes for the camera, providing context and motivation that would make any jury's decision effortless. But the most damning revelation came when Eleanor made a phone call to Judge Patterson, apparently to gloat about her anticipated victory. "James, it's over," she said with barely contained excitement. "The house will be a pile of ashes by morning, and all the evidence dies with it. Daniel's already run off like a scared little boy, probably planning to kill himself anyway, just like I planned when I triggered his grandfather's heart attack and then made sure the ambulance couldn't save him." The phone call was being automatically recorded by multiple systems, and Patterson's horrified responses provided additional confirmation of Eleanor's guilt. "Eleanor, you can't keep doing this," he pleaded. "How many people have to die to protect your secret? Sarah, Henry, now Daniel. Who's next?" Eleanor's response to Patterson's moral crisis revealed the true depth of her psychopathy and provided the missing piece of the puzzle that connected all her crimes. "Don't you understand, James? I didn't kill Sarah for the money, though that was certainly nice. I killed her because she was always better than me, always the favorite, always the one everyone loved and respected. When she decided to give away our family fortune to charity, it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about making sure that for once in my life, I would be the one who won." Her voice became increasingly manic as she continued. "And Henry had to die because he was getting too close to the truth. I saw him researching the case, connecting the dots. When I realized he was about to tell Daniel everything, I had to act fast. The pacemaker hack was elegant, don't you think? A heart attack triggered by his medical device. The trap reached its perfect culmination when Eleanor discovered that her fire-starting equipment wasn't working properly, leading her to investigate why the house's systems weren't responding to her sabotage attempts. As she moved through the rooms, growing increasingly frustrated and paranoid, she began talking more freely about her methods and victims. "I've gotten so good at this over the years," she bragged to her laptop's camera, apparently live streaming to Patterson. "The Internet of Things makes murder so much easier than in the old days. Smart homes, connected medical devices, automated systems. They're all just weapons waiting for someone intelligent enough to use them properly." The final piece of evidence came when Eleanor realized she had been trapped and began desperately trying to destroy the recording equipment she could see. Her rage and panic caused her to reveal information that even I hadn't suspected, including the names and methods of at least 6 other victims whose deaths she had engineered over the past decade. "You think you're so smart," she screamed at the cameras, apparently believing I was watching from some remote location. "But I've been doing this for years. The Hendersons' carbon monoxide leak, Mrs. Peterson's medication overdose, and the Williams family's car accident were all me. I am the invisible hand that shapes this neighborhood, and no one can stop me." Eleanor's complete psychological breakdown in front of the cameras provided law enforcement with the most comprehensive murder confession in modern legal history. Every detail, every method, every victim was captured in 4K resolution with perfect audio quality, creating an airtight case that no defense attorney could challenge. As police sirens finally approached the house, alerted by the automated threat detection system, Eleanor made one final, desperate attempt to escape through the back door. But she was met by Detective Sarah Morrison, Grandpa Henry's former partner, who had been waiting outside with a full tactical team. "Eleanor Blackwood," Detective Morrison announced while the cameras continued rolling, "you're under arrest for the murders of Sarah Blackwood, Henry Morrison, and conspiracy to commit multiple homicides. You have the right to remain silent, though I notice you've already waived that right quite thoroughly." The trial of Eleanor Blackwood became the most technologically sophisticated criminal prosecution in our state's history, setting legal precedents for digital evidence admissibility that would influence courtrooms across the country for decades to come. The prosecution's case was built entirely on the comprehensive digital record I had captured, creating an airtight narrative that left no room for reasonable doubt or creative defense strategies. Eleanor's team of expensive lawyers, led by the best criminal defense attorney her stolen fortune could buy, found themselves in the unprecedented position of having to argue against their client's own recorded confessions, captured in perfect 4K resolution with legally bulletproof chain of custody documentation that made fabrication claims impossible to sustain. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal scholars, and technology experts who had come to witness what many were calling the first truly digital age murder trial. Eleanor sat at the defense table looking nothing like the commanding HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood for years. The confident, manipulative woman who had orchestrated multiple murders while maintaining a facade of suburban respectability had been replaced by a hollow-eyed defendant who seemed genuinely shocked that her technological sophistication had become the instrument of her downfall. Her lawyer's strategy of claiming the recordings were somehow fabricated or manipulated crumbled within hours when digital forensics experts testified about the impossibility of faking the kind of comprehensive, multi-source evidence the prosecution had presented, complete with metadata trails that stretched back months. Judge Patterson's cooperation with prosecutors proved to be the final nail in Eleanor's coffin, though his testimony revealed the full scope of corruption that had enabled her crimes for so many years. Taking the witness stand in shackles, the disgraced former judge painted a picture of systematic judicial corruption that went far beyond covering up a single murder. "Eleanor had compromising photographs and videos of me with multiple people," he testified with visible shame. "She had been collecting blackmail material on judges, police officers, and city officials for years. Anyone who might have investigated Sarah's death too thoroughly found themselves facing career-ending scandals if they didn't accept the accidental death ruling." His revelations led to the largest judicial corruption investigation in the state's history, with over a dozen officials eventually facing federal charges for obstruction of justice and accepting bribes. The digital forensics testimony became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, with expert witnesses walking the jury through every aspect of Eleanor's technological crimes. The evidence showed that she had been operating what amounted to a high-tech murder laboratory, using IoT vulnerabilities and smart home devices to kill people in ways that appeared completely natural to medical examiners. The pacemaker hack that killed Grandpa Henry was just one example of her methods. Investigators had found evidence of at least 12 other victims whose deaths had been engineered through similar technological manipulation. The Hendersons' carbon monoxide poisoning had been caused by Eleanor hacking their smart thermostat to disable safety sensors while remotely opening gas valves. Mrs. Peterson's medication overdose had been triggered by Eleanor reprogramming her automated pill dispenser to deliver fatal doses over several days. The Williams family's car accident had resulted from Eleanor hacking their vehicle's computer system to disable brakes while they were driving on a mountain road during a family vacation. Eleanor's psychological profile, as presented by prosecution psychiatrists, revealed a woman who had been consumed by jealousy and narcissistic rage since childhood, escalating into full psychopathy as she aged. The defendant exhibits classic symptoms of malignant narcissism combined with an unusual level of technological aptitude, testified Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the state's leading forensic psychiatrist. She was able to rationalize multiple murders by framing them as solutions to problems that threatened her self-image and social status. In her mind, anyone who might expose her crimes or diminish her perceived superiority deserved to die, and technology simply provided her with the perfect weapon to execute these fantasies while maintaining plausible deniability. The trial's most dramatic moment came when prosecutors played Eleanor's own recorded confessions, captured during her final night of freedom in our family home. The courtroom fell silent as her voice filled the space, describing her crimes with casual indifference and even pride in her technical accomplishments. "I didn't kill Sarah for the money," though that was certainly nice. I killed her because she was always better than me, always the favorite, always the one everyone loved and respected. Her voice echoed through the speakers with chilling clarity. The jury's faces showed visible horror as Eleanor described her methods, her victims, and her complete lack of remorse for the lives she had destroyed. Her defense team's attempts to claim temporary insanity or emotional disturbance were undermined by the calculated, methodical nature of her confessions and the obvious pleasure she took in describing her technological prowess. The sentencing phase revealed the true scope of Eleanor's crimes and their devastating impact on our community. Family members of her victims testified about lives cut short, dreams unfulfilled, and the ripple effects of murders that had been disguised as accidents for years. Sarah Blackwood's college roommate spoke about a brilliant young woman who had planned to use her inheritance to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. The Henderson children, now adults, described growing up believing their parents had died in a tragic accident, only to learn that their deaths had been cold-blooded murder committed by a neighbor they had trusted. Mrs. Peterson's grandson talked about the guilt he had carried for years, believing he had somehow failed to properly monitor his grandmother's medication, never knowing that a killer had been manipulating her treatment remotely. Eleanor's final statement to the court showed no genuine remorse or understanding of her crimes. "I did what I had to do to protect myself and maintain order in our community," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, still clinging to her self-image as a responsible leader rather than a serial killer. These people were threats to stability, to proper standards, to the way things should be done. I may have used unconventional methods, but my motives were pure. Her complete inability to accept responsibility sealed her fate with a jury that had already heard more than enough evidence of her guilt. Eleanor Blackwood was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole on 7 counts of first-degree murder, with additional consecutive sentences for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and cyber-terrorism charges that added another 50 years to her sentence. Judge Patterson received 15 years in federal prison after cooperating fully with investigators and helping to uncover the broader network of corruption. The money Eleanor had inherited from Sarah's death was distributed according to Sarah's original will, funding charitable organizations and creating the Sarah Blackwood Foundation for Smart Home Safety, which works to prevent the kind of technological vulnerabilities that Eleanor had exploited. As I stood on the courthouse steps after the sentencing, I felt satisfaction mixed with sadness, knowing that justice had been served but at an enormous cost in human lives and community trust. Technology was supposed to make our lives safer, but as we've seen, it can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Your smart home, your connected devices, even your medical equipment could be vulnerable right now, but knowledge is power, and understanding these risks is the first step to protecting yourself and your loved ones. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden dangers lurking in our connected world, hit that like button and subscribe to Happer Stories. Together, we'll keep uncovering the truths that matter most to your safety and peace of mind.
Thank you for choosing Curious with Happer Stories today. If the HOA president reminds you upon feeling with a clipboard, you are not alone. Subscribe for weekly drama, daring revenge, and maybe a surprise lawsuit or two. Fictional, of course, mostly.